Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Celtic Caleb. Okay, look, I have a shout out to give. I probably shouldn't be doing this so early in the episode, but nevertheless, here it goes. A god-dang nice lady named Industrial Bambi left a review on iTunes saying that the show is both strange and delightful, funny, shocking, and ridiculous. Words that describe my personality and also the content of this podcast. So it's a winner for me. Isn't that nice? We always encourage you guys to leave nice reviews for us. It warms my heart sincerely. She also says, Caleb's persistent, adorable snickering is an added bonus. Ah, isn't that sweet? Goodness gracious, I hope it's a lady. I hope Industrial Bambi isn't a man who thinks my snickering is adorable. I'm sure it's a nice, pretty lady. So yeah, feel free to leave a comment or a review. We love to be interacting with you people as much as possible. It just warms my heart. Alright, so a quick warning to listeners. This episode gets a little, not serious, but some of the news stories this week carry a bit of weight with them. So just a warning, towards about halfway through the podcast, we will get to those stories. And if you're not in the mood for kind of heavy-set stories, go ahead and skip ahead. Today, our first segment is going to start off with law-related stories. That includes a man who was so drunk he mistakenly took a Royal Canadian Mounted Police vehicle for a taxi, which ended in his arrest. We will then, in the second segment, move on to some disgusting, gross stories. I'll try to make it as least disgusting as possible. In the third segment, I have my most controversial topics of the week, including a bear who was hunted down because he interacted with humans, and a state flag proposed to Mississippi that was rejected because it promoted mosquitoes. The fourth and final segment will be my top 10 most successful robberies in order of the most amount of value that was stolen. Alright, let's jump right in with my law-related stories, starting with a judge in Texas who was charged after allegedly shooting her husband's girlfriend. It should be noted that this judge was already suspended from the bench after being charged for spending campaign funds on jewelry, luxury items, and her mortgage payments. The shooting of her husband's girlfriend apparently took place during an argument. Apparently it took place at the victim's house, while the judge in question was creating a disturbance in the woman's driveway. According to police, the judge was honking her car like crazy, and then the victim came outside and the judge shot at her. They go on to say that it was much like a drive-by, being that the judge actually pointed the shotgun out of her own vehicle's window when her husband's girlfriend came out. In the judge's defense, never thought I'd have to say that, in the judge's defense, her husband's girlfriend came out with a large board in order to attack her. The victim was aware that the judge had a shotgun and actually tried to smack the shotgun out of the judge's hand with her board. Believe it or not, she was not successful, and apparently the judge reportedly fired 3 different shots before fleeing the scene. The judge's attorney, never thought I'd say that either, said, quote, "My client was in a car and the other woman was outside the car. I believe she was carrying a club of some sort with the intent to assault my client, and then a gun appeared. A shot was fired, but nobody was hurt." The judge was charged last Wednesday and held with a $10,000 bond. Now, it should be said that this bond is higher than normal bonds are, not because the woman is a judge, but because she was actually suspended on previous charges from being a judge due to the fact that she was misspending campaign funds. She is said to have spent it on jewelry, luxury items, her mortgage payments, and more. She was eventually charged with 10 counts of wire fraud, and yet continued to campaign for re-election in the year 2020. Of course, she lost the primary runoff on July 14th, making her a former Texas judge. Now, if you ask me, I do not think she'll be getting off easy. In these times, people do not look fondly upon lawmakers, or those that are enforcing the law. That, paired with her previous offenses, I think makes a good case for her to be made an example of. Now more than ever, the government wants to prove that government employees are not above the law, and hopefully whether she is found guilty or innocent, that will be proven. Alright, next story. I think this one is quite cute. An Italian man gets fined and detained over a rooster's daily early morning crowing. So this Italian man owns a rooster, and apparently it gets very loud during the morning early hours in Italy, and his neighbors were not too fond of it. Apparently this man is 83 years old and was ordered to pay a $200 fine as a result of his pet rooster. In an interview, the man said, quote, "I am speechless. What was the need?" He went on to explain that he was charged by the police before any of his neighbors confronted him about the issue, which is kind of sad. It kind of shows a lack of community. Perhaps that is a result of COVID, however. People don't really want to have a whole lot of community interaction during these trying times. The man went on to say that the rooster used to live on his property in his garden. However, the bird had to be moved even after living 10 years at his house due to his neighbors' complaints. However, he eventually had to take his chicken back from his friend, as his friend had to take 20 days leave for unmentioned reasons, and apparently he was fined again for $200 during this 20-day period, as the rooster kept crowing during the early morning hours, waking people up and frustrating the neighbors who had previously complained. The fine was issued based on a local rule that states pets should be at least 32.8 feet from neighboring houses. That's an amazing law, because of course that would never be taken seriously. About 99% of the violations of that law would never end up being reported to anyone of the law. Just imagine walking your dog down the street and you have to remain 32.8 feet away from neighboring houses. It would be impossible in America, and I can't imagine it's easy in Italy, where everything is kind of more condensed than it is here in America. And to further display the fact that this rule is not well known by many people, the old man says that he was unaware of the rule, and he plans to appeal the fine. He went on to say, quote, "They could have informed me before. I hadn't understood. I can appeal, but where do I go at 83? I will not stop here. I will contact the police headquarters, the prefecture, everyone. Also because I have made other reports to the municipality on the cutting of private hedges and irregular parking spaces that have not received a response." So he's angry that his neighbors' complaints about him got responded to, and his own about his neighbors did not get responded to. When questioned, the mayor of his town, that's how little crime they have in Italy, the mayor can address an issue about a rooster. When the mayor was questioned, she actually said that the old man was lying. Apparently the police went to his house last month in July, informing him about the pet distance rule. So what is the truth? It is hard to say, but I think it's fair to assume that the 83-year-old man probably forgot that people asked him to keep his rooster from crowing so loud in the early morning. Perhaps it was a mistake, and I don't think he should be fined $200. But then again, I don't live next to a very annoying chicken. Time to move on to the aforementioned case of a drunken man who mistook a Royal Canadian Mounted Police vehicle for a taxi. He apparently walked up to the stopped vehicle and jumped right in the back seat while the officer was in it. This occurred last Sunday at around 5 a.m. And since Canada is much like Italy in that they don't have a whole lot of crime, a bevy of officers were called in order to help solve the problem of the intoxicated man causing a disturbance. 2 full units actually ended up responding to the call, where they found the 19-year-old drunken man. Now, here's the twist to this story. While running from the police, well, I guess I should start there. He actually began running from the police. And in his desperate attempt to escape, that is when he decided to jump in a taxi cab, which of course was a police vehicle. And he ordered them, "Take me to 17th Street, bro." One of the officers responded to the incident, quote, "I think at the time he knew he had made quite the mistake there. Officers just look him back in the detachment where he could have time to sober up." That might have made more sense if I read it in a Canadian accent, but I can't do a Canadian accent, so you'll have to bear with me while I sum up their statement. Quote, "It is just kind of a funny situation that we wanted to share with the public. It's not always doom and gloom. There are some funny aspects of our job, and sometimes it's nice to let the public know about these things." They ended up posting the story on their Facebook page, where it quickly went viral. And eventually the man was released without charges. So obviously the statement about Canadians being much nicer than most people is true. Because if this was in America, he would have been charged for both public intoxication as well as resisting arrest. And I love America, but I think sometimes it might be best to handle these situations when nobody gets hurt in a more humorous way. Alright, time for our final story regarding the law. And it's kind of a transition into my disgusting stories. A 30-year-old corpse was discovered in a cellar of a €35 million Paris mansion. This mansion is reportedly part of one of the most prestigious areas of Paris, and work began restoring it earlier this year. Apparently it was abandoned. Who abandons a $35 million mansion? Anyways, apparently while they were restoring it, they found a corpse that had been decomposing in the basement for 30 years. Apparently the restoration began as the building began to crumble, as it had not been occupied for the 30-year period previously stated. You can go online and take a look at it. It's quite beautiful because it hasn't been taken care of for 3 decades, so all of the foliage and plants and gardens have grown far beyond their means. Ivy is kind of spouting out from all the cracked walls. There are a couple of broken shutters and cracked windows. It's pretty aesthetic, despite the fact that it looks like a horror set for a horror movie. In fact, one of its agents called it, quote, "the last truly significant property in the capital's most sought-after neighborhood." It finally sold last January. Apparently its restoration is under quite a bit of scrutiny. A lot of people want to maintain the decrepit look of the building, and as a result they had to put a bunch of protected, strict preservation orders around the reconstruction in order to keep its former glory. Alright, that was a lot of background. Now let's talk about the dead body. The vice president of a local association dedicated to preserving the mansion said, quote, "Everyone was devastated to learn it had been there for so long without any of us knowing." Apparently the corpse was found by surveyor workers who removed a pile of planks and rubble in one area of the mansion's cellars and found the corpse underneath it. There were traces of inflicted wounds, such as broken bones and knife cuts, which prompted police to open a murder investigation. He was eventually identified as a man who died 30 years ago, who, quote, "had no fixed abode, who had a drinking problem, and disappeared without a trace." The police went on to say, quote, "We could imagine a fight with someone else living in the mansion, but it is unclear whether he died in the mansion or was brought there, and we may never find out who was responsible. It's quite possible the murderer is himself now dead." Excellent. The man's children have been located and informed that their father has died, even though he's been missing for 30 years. I guess that's some sort of closure. Speaking of closure, the renovation has been paused and is expected to resume later this summer or fall. Isn't that just splendid? Alright, that was the last story I had, but we have a minute to fill, so I'm going to do this one that I wasn't planning on doing before. Secret gyms that are popping up as, quote, coronavirus prohibition bans people without masks. Apparently a young lady was walking down the streets of San Francisco and caught a glimpse of a gym storefront with one of the garage-style roll-down metal doors in front of it, but apparently it was slightly open. The young lady ducked under the door and noticed a guy in workout clothes conducting a training small group. According to her, several other guys were in the back of the room using exercise machines, all without masks. Now, as somebody who recently left San Francisco, I must tell you that they are incredibly strict on their coronavirus restrictions. This is because they were one of the initial hotspots in the United States, forcing them to crack down almost as hard as any other place in the United States. According to the lady, the men looked, quote, more lean, fancy fit than roidy, bro fit. I don't know what any of that means, but I enjoyed reading it. The young lady then entered the gym just to see what was going on. Apparently her fancy suit freaked everybody out. They thought she was like part of the FBI or something. The young lady remarked that she was surprised to see that they were open, and one of the trainers said, quote, oh, we're not open, which has given this kind of gym the name Speakeasy Gym. For those who don't know, old bars that still existed during the time of Prohibition that worked under the law in the black market were called speakeasies. Alright, there, I finished my last 2 minutes. Now we're going to go to a quick break. Stay tuned, we'll get to my disgusting stories, including a lady who gouged her eyes out while on meth and ended up receiving prosthetic eyeballs. That's kind of sad. We'll also do one about a mom who attempted to flog her daughter after finding food leftovers. So yes, as promised, quite disgusting. I'll try to keep it as entertaining as possible. If you want to skip that portion, I understand. You can skip to later on. I'll be talking about my top 10 most successful robberies throughout history. So stay tuned either way for that.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We just talked about some law-related stories. Now we are going to dive into my disgusting stories of the week. We're going to kick it off with a woman who gouged her eyes out while on meth, who ended up receiving prosthetic eyeballs. The woman's methamphetamine trip occurred in 2018. She gouged out her eyes, and it wasn't until this year that she was getting prosthetic ones. The young 22-year-old has been blind since her episode. That's what the article calls it, a psychotic episode, which of course ended with the tragic results previously mentioned. And I know this is supposed to be a disgusting story, but I think it's kind of sweet. The young lady says, quote, I was so excited to get them. I just wanted to appear more normal to the outside world. So it's quite apparent that she is aware that she made a mistake, and now she's recovering from it finally after 2 years, which I think is a beautiful thing. The surgery was performed in South Carolina, and the young lady said in response to the surgery, quote, I feel like I'm a woman again. And then her boyfriend, who's age 42, that's another topic, said, you've always been a woman to me. Isn't that sweet? See, this is a happy story. This shouldn't be in the disgusting story section. Anyway, apparently her boyfriend cried when she came out of the operating room with her new eyes for the first time after the August 5th surgery. The boyfriend said, quote, it melted my heart. She was never any different to me, but I know she wanted this for a very long time, and I'm so happy she has this now. So it's become quite evident that this young lady is pulling her life together, which is great. It's kind of surprising that she didn't die after gouging her eyes out. So she's turning this tragedy around into a life lesson. And isn't that all what we want to see? I can't wait till this is made into a Lifetime movie starring Hilary Duff or something. Some degenerate former Disney star. Anyways. More on this lady's progress. She is attending a school for the blind in aim of obtaining her high school diploma, quickly followed up by an associate's degree. She goes on to say, quote, I've learned a decent amount of Braille, and I can cook, use a stove, wash clothes, make the bed, and look after pets now. I've come such a long way from 2 years ago. The lady says in her final statement, quote, I give it all to God. He's given me my family. He's given me my mom. He's given me Alex and my children. He's given me so much, and regardless of losing my sight, I still have all of those things. All right, now I'm going to go into the story of her cutting out her eyes. So if that is not for you, you might want to skip ahead a minute or two. It gets pretty intense. Here we go. The young lady was 21 years old when she walked into a church in Anderson County, when a horrified bystander watched as she ripped out her eyes in a meth-induced frenzy. She said, quote, I got on my hands and knees and said, God, why me? And I beat the ground, and part of me believed I wouldn't do it, but for some reason I didn't stop. I remember going from them, grabbing them, and forcing them out, and then basically they popped out. It hurt, but I believed it would have hurt me more if I wasn't on drugs. She then passed out and woke up in a hospital several days later, when doctors told her that she would be blind for the rest of her life. She said, quote, I accepted it pretty quickly. There was nothing I could have done about it. I knew my sight was gone the second I woke up. She goes on to say that she spent the next couple of months dedicating herself to getting clean of drugs, as well as growing in faith and learning how to live without her eyesight. Eventually, a doctor offered to give her prosthetic eyes. Of course, she accepted, and she eventually got a new boyfriend between those 2 periods of time. She's apparently deeply in love with her boyfriend. Isn't this a sweet story? God dang it. Apparently, she let her boyfriend choose her eye color. He said, quote, they look just like her eyes. I was honored to help choose the color. And finally, the young lady says that she is glad she lost her eyesight, saying, quote, I thank God for the pain because I look back on the situation and I see what came from something so bad happening. I believe if I didn't lose my sight, I might be dead today. Well, isn't that fantastic? Ha! Okay, next story. We'll get to the mom trying to flog her daughter for not eating her leftovers. But first, let's go to a woman who is suing a police officer who apparently fondled one of her friend's dead bodies. The police officer was outed by his very own body camera, which caught him fondling one of the dead woman's breasts while he was on duty, which is obviously why this is in the disgusting portion of this podcast. However, I must say that this one also has a happy ending, as the man is now being sued by the woman's family. The family apparently filed the lawsuit against the 4-year veteran of the L.A. Police Department, alleging that he, quote, invaded privacy and inflicted intentional emotional distress by manhandling of human remains, among other allegations. Beautiful. So this man is getting what is coming to him, hopefully. He has since been charged with 1 felony count of having sexual contact with human remains without authority. I was not aware that that is in the legal books, but apparently it is. Of course, he is pleading not guilty. However, prosecutors brought to light that the man was wearing a body camera at the time, and they showed it off to everybody in the courtroom in a dramatic turn of events. Apparently, the officer and his partner were reporting to a possible dead body in a residential unit, where they found the young lady who had reportedly died of an overdose in drugs. It wasn't until the man's partner left the room that he turned his body camera off and allegedly groped the young lady's breast. However, he apparently did not turn his body camera off as he thought he did, and it continued to record, documenting the incident, crystallizing his guilt. He has since been placed under administrative leave from the department. Apparently, the body cam footage was brought to the attention of the family when one of the fellow LAPD men told his superior of the incident. Apparently, the video was shared across the LAPD offices, and the family member said this in response, quote, "Learning that the video of her alleged sexual molestation has been viewed by others sickens the family and is deeply disturbing." The dead woman's mother said, quote, "She was infuriated that this man had so little respect for another human being. I want justice for my daughter because of this horrible, disgusting act. I live in fear that the video will surface and another devastation will be added to what is already unbearable." And saddest of all, the young lady's son told the police, quote, "The LAPD has lost his trust due to this disrespectful act. He had a chance to confront the officer that committed the act and said, quote, after losing my mom and processing what you did to her, in her time of need, I can't sleep. All I can think is why." He questioned the jury, quote, "What has this officer gotten away with to believe this is even possible?" He is insinuating that this is not the first time the officer has assaulted women. The police union responded to the incident saying that they will not defend the officer during his criminal proceedings. Quote, "His alleged behavior is abhorrent and an affront to every law enforcement professional working in the LAPD." And finally, prosecutor and spokeswoman Gloria Allred said, quote, "So many women are sexually abused during their lifetime, and now we learn that some are even sexually victimized after their deaths. To add insult to injury, the knowledge that police officer, during the course of his investigation of the death of a young woman, would take advantage of his position of power and trust to allegedly sexually abuse the body of a deceased person is very upsetting." I believe that's a light way of saying it, but it's all we have for now. Let's move on to our next story. A mom tries to flog her daughter after finding food leftovers. That is not good, but the title implies that the flogging was not successful. All right. The Mirror said on the matter, quote, "A moaning mom has offered to pay someone to take her teenage daughter off her hands after discovering she's left a plate festering for so long it had grown into Cousin It from the Addams Family." Goodness gracious. So there's a little bit more to this story than just the young lady not eating her leftovers. Apparently she left them in the microwaves for such a long time that it grew into a giant gray moldy mass. The mother shared a picture of the mass before blaming her 19-year-old daughter, Liv Taylor. I have to say that just because it's funny that she's named after a celebrity. Liv Taylor forgot her dinner in the microwave for over a week. I'm kind of amazed that they didn't end up using the microwave for that entire week. Nevertheless, let's move on. The mom went on to insult her daughter, saying, quote, "We need to find her a nice boyfriend, but I am convinced that no one would put up with her. That is why she is single." Goodness gracious, that is brutal. Although I have to admit, I agree with the mom that it is quite disgusting. You can go online and look at the picture she posted. It's basically a giant mass that's hanging over the plate. I mean, it has to be 1.5 feet long of just gray moldy mass. The mom says it resembles a dead gray cat, but it looks even bigger than that to me. Apparently the mom had to clean the microwave with bleach and hot water after the discovery and still has not been able to stomach its use since, vowing to only ever eat anything cold. She's being a bit melodramatic, but I think it's funny that she's making her point. In the old phrase, she exaggerates to clarify. All right. After the mom posted it on Facebook, she added a comment, quote, "This is why I want somebody to take her off my hands. I keep saying she needs a nice boyfriend, but she says she doesn't want one. She can't be bothered. She can't get a boyfriend because no one would put up with her." Goodness gracious. I don't use the microwave very often, and I was putting something in there. I opened the microwave door, and that was what I was greeted with. This big ball of what looked like a dead gray cat. She went on to exaggerate, quote, "You know the Scape Savers ad where he's trying to resuscitate the cat and it's actually a hat? That's exactly what it put me in mind of. I had gone past mold. It was disgusting. It looked like Cousin It from the Addams Family. There was no smell. It was like the mold had encased it all and not let any smell out. I thought, what in the pig and hell is this? I had to say it in that accent because that is where she is from. Quote, and then the next words out of my mouth were, Olivia, get here. Quote, she's having the first lot of food that comes out of the microwave next. I'm not eating anything out of there until she does. And then she goes on to sell her daughter. Quote, does anybody want Liv Taylor? I'm giving her away for free to a good home. No, actually, I will pay someone to take her, and I don't care if it's a good home or not. I have just gone and put something in the microwave, which I haven't used very often, and I found her half-eaten tea from last week. I can't cope with her. Please, someone send help. I don't know why she called it tea. Apparently, it was actually sweet chili chicken and noodles. Gross. And apparently the microwave itself is built into the kitchen, which I've never heard of. But it brings up the issue. Quote, obviously I can't throw my microwave away because it's built into my kitchen. So then I used hot water and bleach, and I have not used it since. It also has a blacked out door, so you can't just see what's in the microwave as you're walking past, and when I opened it, that's what I saw. She has done it before, but not to that extent. It wasn't that bad. She was too busy laughing at it when I shouted her down. She thought it was hilarious. She still does. To be fair, lady, I kind of find it hilarious, and I think you do too. I know it's gross, but things can be both gross and funny at the same time. The lady goes on to say, quote, she's 19. I can't really ground her, and I don't want to ground her, to be honest. I'd rather she went out. Since sharing the post, I've had no offers. And finally, we have the daughter's statements. She said, quote, I cooked a full tub of chicken and I couldn't eat it all, so I put it in the microwave, but then when I went out, I just forgot it was there. My mom shouted down, and it had grown fluff. I just forgotten it was there. I didn't think it smelt, so I think that's why we didn't realize. I saw the Facebook post. She keeps trying to give me away to everyone. It's not very fair, is it? I've got it too good at home, so it's easier to stay home. I think she's unfair saying that I need a fella. Alright, so I think this kind of reveals that it's actually kind of just a jocular thing between the two ladies. Obviously the mom's upset, but she's not seriously all that angry at her child, and her child is not all that seriously angry at her mom. They're just poking fun at each other for their own foibles. I think the problem rests in the fact that the mom is not disciplining her daughter enough. The fact that the mom cleaned the microwave herself is a telltale of that. So perhaps that's something she should crack down on more, but that's none of my business. The daughter is 19 years old, she's an adult, and so is the mom, so it's between those two. Alright, I had a story about leech smuggling, but I used up all the time on that god-dang last story, so we're going to move on to my other stories of the week. After a quick break, stay tuned, and later on I'll give you my top 10 most successful robberies.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We are now going to dive into some random weird news, starting with reports saying that COVID-19 lockdowns have led to a huge spike in sex doll sales. Apparently, the fact that most of the world being under strict government instruction to self-isolate has led to record sales in the silicone-based sexual partners business. Apparently, a number of Australian sex doll manufacturers and distributors confirmed this to Vice News last week, stating that sales have been surging ever since lockdown measures were enforced around the country. Some vendors are reporting up to twice as many weekly purchases compared to what they were seeing before the coronavirus outbreak. One of the online sex store owners said, quote, "Since COVID, we are noticing a considerable increase in sales of our sex dolls. We've dubbed our cherry doll sales since March, and now we sell 4 to 5 a week." Which doesn't seem like a large number to me, but what do I know about this kind of thing? Another owner said, "It's true. Since the hard lockdown stages of COVID-19 in Australia, we've experienced an increase in sales about 30 to 40%. It started in about May and has continued since then." So isn't that great? Here everybody thought that COVID-19 would be bad for the economy. Now we are learning otherwise. And according to the owners of these erotic stores, apparently these are not mostly single people who are buying these dolls. Apparently the increase is due to partners and couples who are buying more for themselves and each other. Quote, "In this new trend, we've got a husband buying a female doll alongside his wife for him. A husband and a wife buying dolls together, one for each other, and also a general increase in women buying male dolls for themselves." Isn't that fantastic? Everybody's better off now. I guess COVID-19 wasn't so bad after all. According to the same owner, he says that he, quote, "have been making a lot of requests for dolls without any genitals, and a doll with a tail, and a doll with 3 breasts. Goodness gracious, this is completely insane. And if you ask me, downright filthy. Quote, "We also get a lot of requests for custom-made heads," which is incredibly frightening. Imagine your stalker making a head, making a doll with your head on it. Let me give a shout out to my stalker, Robbie Canton. Robbie, if you're doing that with a doll, no comment, okay? However, it is not all happiness in the sex industry. Apparently, according to one other owner of a sex store, quote, "While organic online traffic and inquiries have seen a major uptick, the distributions that the pandemic has caused for postage, flight, and general mobility has had a serious impact on the shipping and delivery of products. For international shipping, the logistics involved in finding shuttle flights between the manufacturer and Australia has been greatly impacted. Over recent months, it has not been unusual to have a doll waiting for up to a week between connecting flights, where ordinarily this might only be a few days at most." He also goes on to note that the Australian Border Force has recently intensified its screening measures for all international shipments, which has had a major impact on the ease with which sex dolls can be imported into the country. Apparently, a lot of these packages are getting searched. Perhaps in their x-ray machines they are seeing a lot more human-like objects and have become a lot more skeptical of such things. Quote, "On a small percentage of occasions, a doll has been awaiting a customs clearance exam for up to 6 weeks, when the normal processing time is advertised as being up to 72 business hours." So, overall, although the sales are growing, they are having more and more problems doing the shipment for said sales when it comes to lifelike inanimate partners. Quote, "We're struggling to keep up with the demand. They're selling like hot cakes," which is one of the best problems to have when it comes to business. They go on to say, quote, "We believe that those who are single or live by themselves want a human-like construct to just be near in these times. Despite skepticism, we've found from taking directly to our own customers that our dolls actually do provide emotional comfort as well as sexual expression." Goodness gracious, what a bunch of smut. Let's move on to our next story. Hopefully it's a little more kosher. Hair-sniffing bear plays with a group of ladies before being relocated by government force. So this story all began last month when a couple ladies were hiking in Mexico, and then all of a sudden a black bear approached them, got close, and even got personal with one of the young ladies. The bear stood on its hind legs and sniffed all over the woman, including getting deep into her hair at one point. She managed to take a selfie in the moment, so you can go online and take a look at that. It's pretty cute in a quite horrifying way. There's also a video taken by a bystander where you can see the bear sniffing all around the lady, and when she takes a step back, which you're not supposed to do, he swats at her a few times. Thankfully, she left unscathed. But the same cannot be said for the bear. Wildlife authorities captured and castrated the animal and will ship him to his home. His new home in Chippinquay Ecological Park. My weekly mispronunciation for you there, folks. Where he will hopefully have a new terrain isolated from human beings. One of the problems government officials have with wild beasts that can potentially be dangerous is when they get familiar with human beings, because once they're not afraid of human beings, the chances of them coming into contact and hurting somebody grows exponentially. Despite this, authorities have gained a lot of criticism due to the fact that they castrated and relocated the bear. However, they defend themselves by saying it has come too close to other visitors in the park as well, and the castration is supposed to help keep the bear from fighting other males in its new home. Meanwhile, supporters of the bear say that the humans are to blame because they kept feeding the animal on visits to the park, which is probably true, but I think you should still side with the humans on this one. However, if you feel differently than me, you can go online and sign a petition, which puts the blame squarely on, quote, human recklessness. Either way, I recommend you go online and take a look at the video taken as well as the selfie, both of which are quite cute in their own right. However, the aftermath should be well known, as these things don't come without consequences. Alright, next story. Mississippi rejects a state flag featuring a giant mosquito. So this all began as Mississippi recently retired their last state banner under the accusation of it being a Confederate battle emblem, which was widely condemned as racist. As a result, a 9-member commission was recommended to replace the flag by legislative mandate with only 2 rules. It cannot contain a Confederate symbol and must have the phrase, "In God We Trust." In the first round of the selection process, the public got to submit their flags. Over 3,000 designs were submitted, and the commission eventually narrowed it down to 147 proposals. However, one of the ones that passed the screening had one giant mosquito surrounded by a circle of stars, and unfortunately one of the council members thought that it was inappropriate and had it removed from the batch that was previously approved. The agency said, quote, "The mosquito flag advanced to round 2 due to a typo in the list of flag numbers submitted by one commissioner. That commissioner has requested that the flag be removed from round 2 gallery, and MDAH staff has complied." Of course, as with everything that is cancelled these days, this came down with a bunch of goddang scrutiny. However, the association said that they have many beautiful flags left, including designs with magnolias and stars. Isn't that nice? Some have wavy lines that could, quote, represent the waters of the Mississippi River or the Gulf of Mexico. This coming Friday, which will be yesterday when this episode airs, we'll choose the 5 final flags. Isn't that exciting? They hope to decide by early September on which design they will put as their new state flag. Now, for those who don't know, mosquitoes are a big problem in Mississippi. They actually transmit a lot of horrible diseases throughout humankind as well as animals. They have discovered West Nile, Zika, and chikungunya viruses, all of which have devastating effects, even to the people who survive the attacks. So the flag is seen as quite an offensive symbol by a lot of people in Mississippi who have suffered from these kind of diseases. However, it is said that the mosquito flag is just a joke. Coming from the man who created it himself, it only took about 5 minutes to make. He said, quote, "I believe people from all backgrounds can get behind and raise it proudly. I said something like that in the submission email, and now I actually do believe that." As previously stated, the reaction to the flag was both highly negative and highly positive, both polarizing, except one of them kind of had, morality on their side. saying that they didn't want to be offended because they have suffered from these kind of diseases promulgated by mosquitoes in Mississippi. And the creator of the flag responded, quote, "It was a very emotional hour. I went from the highest of highs to, oh well, that sucks." This guy's brilliant. They need to make this the national flag. It's beautiful. He goes on to say, quote, "Our state bird unofficially has to be the mosquito. They're everywhere. They're terrible." So if you look at it the right way, he actually made this flag to create awareness of the issue, not to make fun of it. No. He goes on to say, "It's the mosquito's state. We're just living in it." All he had to do to create the flag was, quote, "Google Mississippi flag and mosquito," and then combine the two images. Finally, when responding to the fact that his flag was removed from the competition, he said, quote, "I'm just glad we're moving forward. I don't think they can go wrong. I've seen the designs they are at now, and they are not bad." So he's clearly just a joker. However, I think that if the flag was publicly elected, the public would largely choose the mosquito flag just because it's kind of funny. And usually that tends to be what people vote for. Just whatever makes them laugh. Alright, I'm going to end on a happy story now, which really isn't weird news at all. Just god-dang happy news. Satellites find a new colony of emperor penguins. Apparently in the Antarctic, a satellite recently discovered an entire raft of emperor penguins breeding and frolicking. This discovery is so large that it actually increases the estimated emperor penguin population by 5 to 10%, possibly as much as 278,500 breeding pairs. Those are pairs, not individual penguins, which is just insane. This news makes me so happy. The scientists who found the new group of penguins said that they are very glad to have found it, as they were getting slightly depressed due to the fact that the white continent was warming. They expected the penguin numbers to dissipate, and they are glad to see that that is not the case. However, they do go on to say that the entire animal's life cycle is centered around the available of sea ice, and if that is diminished, then the animal's numbers will be hit hard. Some estimating that the number of penguins will be cut in half by 2100. But wait, there's more. Later last week, they also found the existence of 3 other groups of penguins, which are using their grounds as a mating ground. So they're not slowing down production quite yet, which is excellent news. And this total brings the active breeding sites from 50 to 61. Isn't this great? We're ending the 3rd segment on penguins. I couldn't be happier. One of the scientists said, quote, "It's good news because there are now more penguins than we thought." This is a very simple man, and I love him. I like the way he thinks. He goes on to say, quote, "But this story comes with a strong caveat because the newly discovered sites are not in what we call the refugia, areas with stable sea ice such as the Weddell Sea and the Ross Sea. They are all in more northernly vulnerable locations that will likely lose their sea ice." Which is unfortunate, but I think it's important that we take a happy note from this too. We don't have to turn every happy story into a sad one. Go online, look at the pictures of these newly found emperor penguins, and just be happy for a goddamn hour or so, people. Come on, you've earned it in 2020. Alright, that's it for the 3rd segment. We're going to move on to my 4th and final one next, where I will do my top 10 most successful robberies. Stay tuned for that.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We're going to get into my top 10 most successful robberies to have ever happened in all of ever history. Let's get started with the Great Train Robbery, in which $4.1 million were stolen off a Royal Mail train. This is said to have been a finely orchestrated operation which planned to intercept the Royal Mail train, which at the time was full of high-value packages en route from Glasgow in England. The operation was devised over the course of several months, in which a gang of 15 robbers hatched and executed a now legendary plan. The plan involved rigging the trackside signals to stop the train in a remote location where the conductor was overpowered and the loot was stolen. You've probably heard of a lot of similar stories just in films and books alone, as this robbery inspired many artists, and it even inspired a few other robberies. Unfortunately, none of those show up on the rest of this list. However, I think the Great Train Robbery is pretty interesting to research because it was actually quite disastrous, despite the fact they got away with stealing $4.1 million. What I would recommend doing is looking up the QI video, just search QI Great Train Robbery, and you will come across the fact that it was not entirely well executed. They initially did not plan just to steal all the loot off the train. They originally wanted to drive the train by itself so that they could deliver the packages right to a set-up desired location. However, the man they hired to drive the train turns out had no idea how to drive a train. So they ended up having to steal it all by hand, and eventually they lugged it all back to their designated location of storage. And when they got there, they took out all of the stolen money and played a game of Monopoly with it. And when they left the unit, they actually left the Monopoly game there. Of course, they took the money, but by leaving the Monopoly game there, they left their fingerprints over everything. And as a result, I believe it was 12 of them who got caught fairly quickly after the robbery occurred. However, it's no doubt still impressive that they managed to steal $4.1 million in 1963 off of a train. I know, I wouldn't have been doing that if it was 1963. I know where I would be. I'd be smoking pot with all those goddamn hippies in California. Alright, number 9. The Dunbar Armored Robbery. So this great robbery occurred in Los Angeles in 1997, and it is actually the largest cash robbery ever to have occurred in the U.S. And staying true to conventional movie logic, it was an inside job. The mastermind behind it was actually a regional safety inspector for Dunbar, who recruited 5 of his childhood friends in order to ambush the guards at one of the stocked cash drop vaults in Dunbar. It is said that once they gained access to all of the loot, they loaded it up into a U-Haul and then escaped promptly, nearly getting away with the whole thing until one of the perpetrators got sloppy and eventually confessed. Now, that's what this article says. However, I don't believe that it's sloppy to confess. I think it's wrong-headed. It's ass over kettle wrong. That's what it is. If I was a great robber, that would be rule number 1 on my rules list. Never confess. It just seems like a bad way to handle a robbery. Anyways, to this day, more than half of the money remains unaccounted for, and the total amount stolen was $18.9 million. I didn't know you could fit that much money in a U-Haul. Perhaps I have undervalued their services. Alright. Number 8, the British Bank of the Middle East's robbery. That one is a handful of a title, and as is the amount stolen. In fact, they're not even sure how much was stolen, as it wasn't just cash, it was also jewels and stocks, which totaled around $20 to $50 million. That's a big range. The range is actually 150% bigger than the initial number. Oh well. This robbery actually took place in the middle of Lebanon's civil war, when a group associated with the Palestinian Liberation Organization blasted through a bank's walls, through the church next door. Wow, so these people are certainly going to hell. They also hired a crack team of locksmiths in order to help bust open the vault door. and as previously stated, they walked away with a bunch of gold, cash, stocks, and jewels, the value of which is unknown, and as a result, there's not much more to dive into. Alright, number 7, the Northern Bank robbery. This one also happened in the UK, and resulted in about $41 million of money being stolen. $41 million of money. I'm such a goof sometimes. Alright, so this occurred days before Christmas, where a gang of robbers posing as officials coaxed their way into the homes of 2 of the bank branch managers, holding them and their families at gunpoint in order to get themselves into the vault. It wasn't until the following day that while their families remained under the threat, that the managers were instructed to head to work as normal. They were told to let the robbers in at the end of business hours. Eventually, the robbers looted the entire place, and the thieves released the families unharmed. See, so they're robbers with hearts of gold. They only ruined several million people's lives. Anyways, many have speculated that the whole thing was the work of the provincial IRA. But as of today, this crime remains unsolved. Somebody actually got away with stealing $41 million. And no, I don't feel bad for letting you guys know how to do that. Because I am a personal responsibility absolutist, it is up to you to not rob people. Alright, number 5. Wait, no, that was a lie. Number 6. Also taking place in the UK, this occurred in 1983, the Brinks Mat robbery, which was also for $41 million. Being that these took place in the same location and had the same amount of money stored, my guess is that England has some regulation on how much banks can keep in their vaults. However, I think $41 million might be a bit much to carry in cash that can be taken out if somebody's lucky enough to get in. Anyways, the Brinks Mat robbery occurred an early morning in November when 6 robbers made their way into the bank's warehouse, which is actually at a Heathrow airport. They were assisted by one of the security guards who was in on the job, of course. Their original plan involved taking just €3 million in cash, which is a little under $6 million, as that is all they thought would be under the lock and key. However, once they opened it, they discovered an additional 3 tons of gold and a bunch of diamonds, which octupled their planned payday. Apparently, several murders have been linked to the case, and while much of the gang involved has since been convicted, the gold was never recovered, which is fairly impressive. I can understand how you laundry cash, but how do you laundry gold? You can't put that in a dryer. Ridiculous. Number 5. The Banco Central burglary. Goodness gracious, I can't speak today. This occurred in Brazil in 2005 and resulted in $70 million being stolen. This is a pretty short one, pretty cut and dry. After renting a commercial property in the middle of the city and posing as landscapers, a gang behind the enormous heist spent 3 months digging a 256-foot tunnel to a position beneath the bank. So this one is also very much like the movies, in which the criminals actually dug their way underneath the bank. This is actually more like a Gary Larson cartoon. Anyways, over the course of just one weekend in August, they ended up tunneling through the reinforced concrete into the vault at the bank's central branch, and they managed to remove 3.5 tons of Brazilian real notes, much of which has yet to be recovered. So if you have some spoons, some spades, and some free time, go ahead and steal yourself $70 million. My guess is that now this bank has some preventions against people digging their way into their vault. Seems like a pretty big security overlook. Okay, number 4. The Securitas Depot robbery, which also occurred in the UK. And this one was pretty recent. It occurred in 2006. And it is, in fact, the largest cashed robbery in British history at an estimated $83 million. Or 53.1 million euros. Or I think that's pounds, because it's British, isn't it? Anyways, it was executed with more violent vision than most of the other robberies on this list. Unfortunately, you can't steal $83 million without getting your hands dirty, believe it or not. Apparently, these gang members posed as police and kidnapped both the Securitas branch members and his family. Many people suspect that this was based on the other UK robbery stated earlier in this list, as they both consisted of people kidnapping security managers and their families. My guess is after these two incidents, they have measures against kidnapping of bank managers. Anyways, this heavily armed gang apparently brought the managers to the depot where they bound him and 14 employees. They then, of course, forced them to open the cash cages. However, due to the violent actions of this gang, most of them were found. And of course, they were convicted, although at least one is said to be living off of the loot as a free man in the West Indies. Alright, number 3. This occurred in London in 1987, and it's the Knightsbridge Vault robbery. It is said to have been perpetrated by an Italian playboy and career criminal, Valerio Vessi, who was implicated in over 50 different bank robberies during his lifetime. The execution of this operation was surprisingly simple after entering the bank during business hours under the guise of opening a safety box deposit. He and his armed accomplice subdued the manager and security guards, freeing them up to let more accomplices in order to help them bust open as much of the vault as possible. Eventually, they walked out with about 62 million pounds in cash, or $97 million. But it was not just cash, it was also jewelry and other valuables. And according to history, the man enjoyed a brief period of freedom by fleeing to South America, but it was eventually intercepted by British authorities. He was then jailed, and when he came back to visit England in order to retrieve his Ferrari. So that would be rule number 2 on my robbery list. Do not go back to the place you robbed in order to get your Ferrari. Alright, we're in the top 2 now. Number 2, Dar es Salaam bank heist. This occurred in Baghdad, Iraq in 2007. Of course, the country was under quite a turmoil at the moment. And that ended up being, or leading to, one of the greatest heists in all of history. Of course, many of the details related to the major robbery of mostly American cash remains a mystery due to the fact that Baghdad in 2007 was not a hot spot for reporters. But according to the Iraq Interior Minister, it has been revealed that the whole heist was engineered by a pair of guards who worked for the bank. They were allegedly connected to militias roaming the region back in 2007, and they stole an estimated $282 million, most of which was United States dollars. Of course, that had an estimated very large impact on the war at the time. How many lives it cost will never be known. Alright, time to move on to number 1, which happened in the exact same place. Baghdad, Iraq in 2003, a bit earlier than the last one, and it was the Central Bank of Iraq robbery. Of course, being that it's number 1, it is known as the biggest bank heist in history. Beyond that, the theft was allegedly ordered and directed by Saddam Hussein himself, just days before the American invasion. Local reports suggest the following: a note signed by Hussein surfaced, which instructed that let me say this slowly, $920 million be withdrawn by the bank and given to his son. That's a good dad. Say what you will about Saddam Hussein, he was a good dad. Anyway, he was supposed to give this to his son, who reportedly spent the better part of his 5 years with another unknown individual who was loading the heaps of money into vehicles in an undisclosed location. Of course, today it is unclear how much of the total missing cash has been recovered, but it is believed that at least $650 million was discovered in one of Hussein's places. Some say that it was a palace, some say that it was a cave, but apparently it was recovered by the military during a raid. $920 million. Just brutal. But you know what's even more brutal? That is the end of the podcast. Sad, isn't it? Nevertheless, I will thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I will also ask that you subscribe. Please leave a comment below and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And that's it for this week. I will see you next time. Have a great weekend. Love you. Bye.